I never thought my high school would be the kind of place that kept secrets. It was an ordinary building in an ordinary town, with faded brick walls, squeaky linoleum floors, and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead like dying insects. The kind of place where lockers jammed more often than they opened, and the biggest mystery was who kept clogging the cafeteria sinks with mashed potatoes. That was the version of the school everyone else saw. But me, I stumbled across something different. Something hidden. Something that if I could go back, hide, give anything to unsee. It started with detention. Not because I'd done anything particularly bad, at least. Not compared to half the idiots in my class, but because Mr. Ginkins had it out for me. He said I had an attitude problem. Maybe I did. Maybe rolling your eyes when he lectured about the importance of discipline wasn't the smartest move, but it didn't deserve 3 hours alone in the history wing. Scraping gum off the undersides of desks while the janitor rattled around with his mop. The history wing wasn't like the rest of the school. The newer sections, the gym, the library, the science labs had been renovated within the past decade. All shiny glass doors and polished tile. But the history wing hadn't been touched in years. The walls were a sickly yellow color, like old paper, and the paint peeled at the corners. The windows were cloudy with grime, and every footstep echoed in a way that made you feel like you weren't walking alone, even when you were. I remember muttering under my breath, prying a hardened blob of gum from the bottom of a desk, when I noticed something odd. Across the room, along the far wall, near the teacher's filing cabinets, the baseboard was crooked. It looked as if someone had pried it open and then jammed it back into place. Normally, I wouldn't have cared, but the tension does things through your brain. It makes every sound, every flicker of light, every detail feel exaggerated. And suddenly, that crooked baseboard was the most interesting thing I'd seen all day. I crossed the room, crouched down, and tugged at it. At first, it didn't budge. Then, with a little more force, it snapped free, sending a puff of dust into my face. Behind it, I expected to see insulation or wires, maybe a dead mouse. Instead, I found a hollow Gappa crawl space, just wide enough for someone to squeeze through. My heart pounded. Every sane thought told me to leave it alone. Cover it back up. Forget about it. But the thing about being a teenager is that you're not wired for sane thoughts. You're wired for curiosity. And mine was screaming louder than my fear. I leaned closer, shining the weak light of my phone into the gap. The beam disappeared into darkness. A faint draft brushed my face, cold and musty, carrying with it the scent of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. I hesitated. If Jenkins caught me snooping, I'd probably get suspended. But that thought only made me grin. Getting suspended for finding a secret tunnel in the school? That was way better than getting punished for attitude. I wriggled my shoulders into the opening, sliding on my stomach like a soldier crawling through the dirt. The plaster scratched at my jacket, and cobwebs clung to my hair. After a few feet, The space opened up enough for me to stand. My phone's light swept across the hidden chamber, illuminating something that didn't make sense. A door. Not just any door, it was heavy iron and locked with a rusted padlock the size of my fist. The kind of door you'd expect in a prison, not a high school. I froze, the air thick around me. Why would there be a locked room hidden behind the history wing? And why did it look like no one had been down there in decades? That's when I heard it, a sound, faint but unmistakable. A low thump from the other side of the door, followed by another and another. Slow, rhythmic, like footsteps. My blood turned to ice. I backed away, heart racing, eyes fixed on that door as if it might burst open at any second. The crawl space suddenly felt much smaller, the air heavier, like the walls were closing in. My brain screamed at me to leave, but my body was frozen, trapped between terror and fascination. Another thump, louder this time. I stumbled backward, scraping my elbows against the plaster as I crawled toward the opening. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the floor and plunging everything into darkness. Panic surged through me, but somehow I scrambled out, shoving the baseboard back into place and collapsing against the desks. For a long moment, I sat there in the empty classroom, gasping for air, my hands shaking. My phone screen glowed faintly in the crawl space, abandoned in the dark. I couldn't bring myself to reach back in and grab it. Not yet. Not after what I'd just heard. When Jenkins returned to dismiss me, I pretended everything was normal. I stuffed my trembling hands into my pockets and plastered on a bored expression. But inside, my thoughts were spinning like a tornado. Because I knew something no one else in that school did. There was a room hidden behind the history wing, a locked room, and something was inside. And whatever it was, it knew I was there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that iron door. I heard those thuds echoing in the dark, like something alive was pacing just beyond reach. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Pipes, maybe. Old buildings make noises. But no matter how many excuses I fed myself, deep down I knew better. By morning, I was wired on caffeine and nerves. My phone was still sitting down there in the crawl space, probably buzzing with a dozen notifications from my group chat. But I wasn't about to march into the history wing during first period and announce I'd found a secret room. I needed a plan. That's when I thought of Amy. Amy was the kind of friend you could count on when logic failed. Sharp, curious, never afraid of breaking rules if it meant uncovering something interesting. She'd been with me on plenty of stupid adventures, sneaking onto the football field at night, ghost hunting in the abandoned train yard. So, if anyone would believe me, it was her. I caught her at her locker between classes, the hallway buzzing with students. You ever wonder if this school has secrets? I asked, lowering my voice. She squinted at me. Secrets? Like what Principal Thomas has a stash of tequila in his office. I leaned closer. I'm serious. I found something. A hidden space behind the history wing. Her eyes lit up instantly. That was me give her a puzzle, and she was hooked. Show me. We met after school, waiting until the halls emptied. The janitor's cart squeaked down the far corridor before disappearing into the cafeteria. Perfect timing. I led her into the classroom where I'd spent detention, heart pounding as I crouched near the crooked baseboard. You're not kidding? She whispered. With a quick tug, the board popped free, and the stale draft rolled out again. Amy wrinkled her nose. Smells like something died down there. Yeah, I muttered. Maybe something did. We crawled inside together, my phone still glowing faintly on the floor where I'd dropped it. I snatched it up, brushing off dust, while Amy's flashlight beam swept across the chamber. The door loomed in the shadows, even more imposing than I remembered. Holy, she breathed. Why would there be a door like this under a school? That's what I've been asking. She tapped the lock with her boot. Think we can break it? I hadn't gotten that far in my plan, but Amy already had. She pulled a bobby pin from her hair, crouched, and started fiddling with the rusty padlock. I stood frozen, every nerve on edge, listening for another thump. My skin prickled with the memory of the sound. You hear that? I whispered. Hear what? I strained, holding my breath. Silence. For a second, I almost believed I'd imagined it, but then faint. Muffled another thud rattled through the iron. Amy froze mid-motion, her eyes darting to mine. Someone's in there, she whispered. My throat went dry. Or something. She swallowed, then twisted the pin again. The lock resisted, groaning with rust, before snapping open with a metallic crack. That echoed far too loud in the chamber. The padlock clattered to the ground. Neither of us moved. The door loomed, daring us. You first, Amy whispered. I shook my head. No way. You opened it. But the argument was cut short when the door creaked on its own, slowly, like something on the other side had been waiting for the lock to give. A gap appeared, just wide enough for a breath of cold air to sweep through, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something acrid, almost chemical. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. Then the gap widened, and we saw what lay beyond. The room was larger than I expected, its walls lined with shelves stacked high with old boxers, dusty files, and jars filled with strange specimens floating in yellowish liquid. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying as if stirred by an unseen hand. Amy gasped. This is like some kind of lab. We stepped inside cautiously, the floor creaking beneath us, my flashlight beam cut across faded papers pinned to corkboards. Newspaper clippings about missing students, scribbled notes full of diagrams I couldn't understand, and photographs of kids from the school some I recognized. My stomach churned. This stuff goes back decades, Amy whispered, flipping through a binder thick with reports. Experiments. Subjects. A glass jar on the shelf caught my eye. Inside, suspended in murky fluid, was something that looked like an animal heart but too large, too distorted. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Not muffled this time. Not distant. Inside the room. Coming from the shadows beyond the shelves. Amy's eyes widened. She grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a cabinet just as the bulb above us flickered again, plunging half the room into darkness. A figure emerged. Tall. Thin. Wearing what looked like a lab coat stained with something dark. Its face was hidden behind a cracked surgical mask, and its Gadits's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflecting like an animal's in the dark. It stopped in the middle of the room, head tilting slowly, as if sniffing the air. I held my breath, every muscle screaming not to move. Amy's nails dug into my arm. The figure turned toward the shelves, inspecting them, humming under its breath in a low, broken tune, a melody that sounded like a lullaby but warped. Wrong. We waited. Seconds dragged like hours. Finally, the figure shuffled toward the far corner, disappearing through another door we hadn't noticed before. The moment it was gone, Amy exhaled shakily. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I shook my head, unable to form words. Because whatever that thing was, it wasn't a teacher. It wasn't a janitor, and it sure as hell wasn't human. We didn't breathe until the last echo of footsteps vanished. Even then, my lungs burned like I'd been holding back a scream instead of air. Amy's hand trembled on my arm, her face pale in the glow of her phone's flashlight. We need to leave," she whispered. For once, I didn't argue. I wanted nothing more than to crawl out of that hidden chamber and never look back. But as we turned toward the door, something caught my eye, a stack of folders on a nearby desk, spread out like someone had been reading them recently. My name was printed across the top of one. I froze. Amy followed my gaze. "What the?" I grabbed the folder, flipping it open. Inside were pages of typed reports, medical records, attendance logs, behavior notes. They weren't just about me. They were about dozens of students. Each file cataloged details no teacher or counselor should have had. Blood types, allergies, even information about our families. My stomach twisted. "They're keeping track of us," I muttered. Amy's face hardened. "Not just keeping track." She flipped to the last page. At the bottom, scrawled in pen, was a word that made my blood run cold. Subject viability. Hi? We didn't have time to process it. A creak echoed from the far side of the lab, followed by that same broken humming. The figure was coming back. Amy shoved the folder into her backpack, zipping it shut. "Move," she hissed. We slipped out of the hidden room, back through the crawl space, replacing the baseboard just as the doorknob in the classroom rattled. I barely had time to dive behind a desk before the door swung open and Mr. Genkins stepped in. His eyes scanned the room. For a moment I thought he'd caught us, but he just muttered to himself, fiddled with the blinds, and left again. The silence afterward was deafening. Amy exhaled, clutching her backpack to her chest. "What the hell did we just find?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. That night, we met at her house, spreading the folder's contents across her bedroom floor. Her little desk lamp cast yellow light over the pages, and the words blurred together, the longer I stared at them. "These go back years," Amy said, flipping through. "Look this. One's from 1998. And this, 1983. Whoever's running this, they've been watching students forever." I rubbed my temples. "But why? What's the point?" Amy hesitated before sliding another page toward me. "It wasn't a report. It was a photograph. Grainy, black and white." It showed students lined up in the very hallway where we ate lunch every day. Except something was off. Their faces looked wrong. Too stretched. Too hollow-eyed. And standing among them was the figure in the lab coat. Younger, maybe, but unmistakable. A chill ran through me. That thing. "It's been here for decades," Amy nodded slowly, "and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere." For the next hour, we pieced through as much as we could, but most of it was jargon. Neither of us understood genetics, chemical compounds, handwritten formulas. All I knew was that our school wasn't just a school. It was a cover, and somewhere in its walls, something unnatural was happening. We should have stopped there. We should have burned the folder, erased the memory, and tried to live normal lives. But curiosity doesn't work that way. Once you peel back the curtain, you can't force yourself to forget what's behind it. So the next day we went back. We waited until after classes, sneaking into the history wing again. The crawl space was just as we left it, dust and settled from our last escape. I half expected the iron door to be locked again, but it hung ajar, inviting us back in. The lab was empty, or at least, it looked that way. Amy wasted no time. Heading straight for the shelves to grab more files, I lingered near the entrance, every sense alert, listening for that broken lullaby. My flashlight flickered across jars of preserved organs, twisted bones, and something that might have been a human hand. My stomach nodded. "Over here," Amy whispered. I hurried to her side. She'd found another binder. This one labeled simply, "Subjects. Phase 2. Inside were photographs of students from our year, kids we knew, kids we saw in the cafeteria every day, and under each photo was a status. Ongoing. Failed. Terminated. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the names. Tyler M. terminated. Sarah L. failed. Jessica P. ongoing. Jessica P. was in my math class. "This is sick," Amy whispered. Her hands shook as she flipped the pages. "They're experimenting on us." Before I could respond, a sound froze us both. Not footsteps this time. Not humming. Something worse. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Ragged. Coming from just behind the shelf. Amy's eyes widened. I grabbed her wrist, yanking her toward the exit. But before we could reach it, a figure stepped into view. It wasn't the one in the lab coat. This one was different, taller. Its body bent at unnatural angles, skin pale and stretched thin like wax paper. Its eyes glowed the same faint light, but its mouth hung open in a silent scream. We froze. The thing tilted its head, bones cracking audibly. Then, with sudden speed, it lunged. Amy screamed. I shoved her toward the crawl space as the shelves crashed behind us, jars shattering, liquid splattering the floor. I didn't dare look back. We scrambled through the gap, slamming the baseboard into place just as the thing slammed against the wall from the other side. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the entire room shuddered. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping in the cool night air, hearts pounding in sync. Amy clutched my arm, her voice shaking. They're not just experimenting. They've made things. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak, because she was right, and was we just woken one up. For the next few days, every second inside the school felt wrong. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. Every face in the hallway felt like it was hiding a secret. Maybe they were. Maybe half the people I passed between classes had files in those binders, stamped with words like ongoing or failed. Amy and I kept our mouths shut. What could we say? Hey, by the way, there's a secret lab under the history wing, where something inhuman almost killed us. No one would believe it. What if the wrong person did? Still, paranoia has a way of eating at you. I caught myself staring at classmates, wondering which ones were just normal kids and which ones had been touched by whatever was happening below. Jessica P. laughed at a joke in math, tossing her hair like she didn't have a giant file labeled ongoing sitting in a dusty folder. Tyler's old locker was empty now, but his file said terminated. Terminated. Did anyone else question where he'd gone? Or had they been told he just transferred like we all were? One night, Amy called me. Her voice was low, urgent. We can't ignore this. If they're experimenting on kids on us, we have to do something. I didn't answer right away, because I agreed with her. But doing something meant going back down there, and the memory of that thing still haunted me every time I shut my eyes. But Amy was relentless. We need proof. More than one folder, enough that no one can deny it. Then we go to the cops. I wanted to argue, to tell her the cops would laugh in our faces, or worse, that they were in on it. But the truth was gnawing at me. If we did nothing, whatever they were building down there would keep growing, keep spreading. And maybe next time, we wouldn't be the ones who walked away. So we made a plan. We waited until Friday night, when the football game pulled most of the town to the stadium. But if it's easier to sneak in, harder to get caught. We met by the back entrance, flashlights and backpacks ready, adrenaline buzzing like electricity in our veins. The crawlspace greeted us like an open mouth. Dust swirled in the beam of my light as we slid inside, the silence so heavy it pressed on my ears. The iron door was still ajar. My heart hammered. I prayed whatever we'd seen before was gone, or at least asleep. The lab looked the same shelves of horrors, files scattered across desks, jars of specimens floating in silence. But something felt different. The air was colder, thicker, and that faint chemical Thames burned my nostrils. We split up. Amy went for the shelves, scanning binders and stuffing them into her bag. I drifted toward the far wall, where a bulletin board was covered in maps and photographs. Red strings connected locations across the town, abandoned buildings, woods, even the football field. Beside each location was a date, and some of those dates hadn't happened yet. Experiments weren't just in the school. They were spreading. A noise made me whip around. Amy had dropped a binder, papers spilling across the floor. "Sorry," she whispered, crouching to scoop them up. That's when the humming started. Soft, broken. The same warped lullaby we'd heard before. Amy froze, eyes wide. The figure in the lab coat shuffled into view, its cracked mask gleaming in the flickering light. It moved slower this time, deliberate, as if it knew someone was there. We dove behind a row of cabinets, pressing into the shadows. My heart beat so loud I was sure it would give us away. The figure's head tilted, listening, before it drifted closer, the lullaby cutting off into silence. It stopped inches from where we hid. Through a gap in the cabinet, I saw its hand long. Pale fingers tipped with cracked nails drifting across the surface as though feeling for vibrations. Amy's hand gripped mine so tightly it hurt. Then the figure turned abruptly and shuffled away, humming again as it disappeared into the far door. We didn't breathe until the sound faded completely. Amy mouthed, "Go?" We scrambled to gather the files she'd dropped. That's when I noticed one of the binders had fallen open, revealing photographs that made my skin crawl. They weren't students this time. They were teachers. Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Keller, even Principal Thomas. Each photo was marked with the same statuses: ongoing, failed, terminated. "They're not just watching us," Amy whispered. "They're watching everyone." Suddenly, the far door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and the bulb overhead buzzed violently before plunging the room into darkness. A low growl rose from the shadows. Not the humming this time. Something deeper. Something animal. My flashlight flickered as I swung it toward the sound. For a split second, the beam caught IT pale skin, stretched too tight over a skeletal frame, jaw unhinged, wider than humanly possible, teeth jagged like broken glass. It launched forward. We bolt papers scattered as Amy shoved binders into her backpack. The shelves toppled behind us. Glass shattering, chemical liquid splashing across the floor. That guttural growl chased us through the lab. Closer! Closer! We dove into the crawl space, scraping our elbows raw as we pulled ourselves forward. The thing slammed into the wall behind us, snarling, claws raking across the plaster. The entire tunnel shook. Amy screamed as her backpack snagged on a nail. I yanked it free, dragging her with me until we spilled back into the classroom. We shoved the baseboard into place just as a deafening crash rattled the wall. followed by silence. We collapsed on the floor, gasping, sweat dripping down our faces. Amy's backpack bulged with stolen files, papers sticking out at odd angles. She looked at me, her voice trembling but fierce. Now we have proof. But all I could think about was the thing on the other side of that wall. The thing that didn't sound like it was locked in anymore. Proof didn't feel like enough when I lay awake that night, listening to the silence in my room, half convinced I'd hear scratching at my window. Amy texted me, nonstop, her messages flashing across the dark screen. "We can't wait. We take this to the cops tomorrow. Promise me." I typed back, "Promise," but the word felt hollow. The next morning, we stuffed the binders into her backpack and met outside the police station. The brick building sat on Main Street, looking as harmless as the coffee shop across from it. But stepping inside, clutching those files, felt like stepping into enemy territory. The desk sergeant raised an eyebrow as Amy explained. At first, he chuckled like we were spinning ghost stories, but when she dumped the binders across his desk, his smirk faltered. He flipped through the photographs, the reports, the diagrams. His jaw tightened. "Sit tight," he muttered. "I'll get the chief." Amy shot me a look that said, "See, they'll believe us." But my gut twisted. Something in the sergeant's voice didn't sound right. Minutes crawled by. Finally, the chief emerged. A broad man with graying hair and a stiff posture. He took one look at the files, then at us, and his eyes narrowed. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "There's a hidden room, a lab. The chief didn't move for a long moment. Then he smiled. But it wasn't relief. It wasn't even disbelief. It was something colder. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he said softly. My stomach dropped. Before we could react, the sergeant stepped behind us, blocking the door. Amy's voice cracked. "You knew. You're part of this." The chief closed the binder with a snap. "Part of it? No. This runs deeper than me. Deeper than this town. But I do my job. And my job is to keep kids like you from sticking your noses where they don't belong." I grabbed Amy's arm, pulling her toward the door, but the sergeant's hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Hard. Take them downstairs," the chief ordered. Downstairs. My heart hammered. I thought of the crawl space, the humming, the creatures. We weren't being taken to a hole-in cell. We were being delivered. Amy twisted, kicking the sergeant hard in the shin. He cursed, loosening his grip just enough for us to bolt. We sprinted through the lobby, shoving past a woman holding paperwork, and exploded out onto the street. "Run!" Amy yelled. We didn't stop until we reached the woods behind the park, lungs burning, hearts thundering. Amy doubled over, gasping. They're all in on it. The cops. The teachers. Everyone. I leaned against a tree, bile rising in my throat. Not everyone. Couldn't be. She shook her head. Doesn't matter. Enough of them are. That's why it's been going on this long. The binders were gone, left behind on the chief's desk. Every shred of proof we'd risked our lives for was in their hands now. For the first time, I felt the crushing weight of hopelessness. We were just two kids. They had the school, the cops, maybe the whole town. What chance did we have? But Amy wasn't ready to give up. If we can't go to them, she said, eyes blazing, we go public. Online. People will listen if we show them. Her determination lit something inside me. Fear still gnawed at my stomach, but anger burned hotter. If they thought they could scare us into silence, they were wrong. That night, we snuck into the school, again not through the history wing, but through a side door we knew the janitor never locked. The halls were silent, shadows stretching long under the dim emergency lights. We crept to the computer lab, booted up the dusty desktops, and started typing. Amy scanned pages from the folder sheet hidden in her locker, the one with my name on it. I wrote everything we'd seen: the lab, the files, the creature. When we were done, we uploaded it all. To every forum we can find, Amy said, clicking furiously. Reddit? Twitter? Anywhere someone might listen. The computers hummed, the progress bar inching forward. My hands shook on the mouse. If this worked, maybe, just maybe, we could drag their secrets into the light. But then the lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the floor, steady and pulsing. Not the sound of pipes, not electricity. A sound I recognized. The lullaby. Amy's eyes went wide. They know. The screen blinked, cutting to black. One by one, every computer in the room powered down. The hum grew louder, closer. And then, from the far end of the hallway, came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, uneven, more than one pair. Amy grabbed my hand. We have to go. We bolted, our footsteps echoing too loud against the linoleum. The hum followed us, weaving through the halls, growing into a chorus of broken voices. The emergency lights flickered overhead, plunging sections of the hallway into darkness. We turned a corner and froze. They were waiting for us. Figures in lab coats, faces hidden by masks, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Behind them, shapes moved too tall, too twisted to be human. Amy squeezed my hand. We're not getting out the front. I scanned the hall desperately, until I spotted a door marked maintenance. We sprinted for it, throwing our weight against the handle. It gave, slamming shut behind us as we stumbled into darkness. The hum was muffled now, but only just. Amy fumbled for her flashlight, flicking it on. The beam cut across shelves of cleaning supplies, coils of rope, and most importantly, a metal hatch in the floor. We didn't think. We didn't plan. We just pulled it open and climbed down. The ladder led us into pitch-black tunnels, the smell of damp concrete filling my nose. Pipes ran overhead, dripping water that echoed like distant footsteps. Amy's voice was shaky. "Where does this go?" I shook my head. "Anywhere but back there." The hatch slammed above us. Footsteps echoed against the metal. We weren't alone in the tunnels. The tunnels stretched on forever, swallowing the faint beam of Amy's flashlight. The further we went, the more it felt like we weren't in the school anymore, but somewhere older, deeper. The concrete walls were cracked, moss creeping through jagged lines. Rusted pipes snaked above us like veins. The sound of water dripping echoed in a rhythm that almost masked the other noisiest, steady shuffle of footsteps following from behind. "They're still comin'," Amy whispered. I didn't need her to tell me. Every hair on my body was already standing on end. I pushed us faster, ignoring the burn in my legs, ignoring the way my lungs screamed for air. The tunnels branched in every direction, twisting like a maze, but Amy always picked left, then right, then straight, as though instinct would save us. Finally, we stumbled into a wider chamber. The ceiling opened up, revealing old brick instead of concrete. In the center sat something that didn't belong at all. A heavy iron chair bolted to the ground, leather straps dangling from the arms, stains darkened the floor around it, too old to tell if they were rust or something worse. Amy's flashlight shook in her hands. "What the hell is this place?" I swallowed hard. Not just a lab, a prison. We had seconds. We sprinted past the chair, deeper into the tunnel. The air grew colder, thicker. My ears popped like we were descending below sea level. Then we reached a door massive steel, with a small window at eye level. Amy hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. I shook my head. We don't have a choice. The door groaned open, revealing a cavernous space lit by dim, flickering bulbs. What lay inside made my stomach twist. Dozens of cages lined the walls. Inside each, something shifted. Not quite human, not quite animal. Pale faces pressed against the bars, eyes milky, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. Some were kids. I recognized them. Jessica P. from math class. Brian from band. Even Coach Howard, his once booming voice now reduced to a low, guttural growl. Amy clapped her hand over her mouth to stop a scream. Tears welled in her eyes. I couldn't look away. The files had been real. The photos, The status is ongoing, failed, terminated. These weren't words on paper anymore. They were breathing, twitching proof. Then one of them, Jessica, lifted her head. Her lips trembled as she whispered my name. Help. Me. Amy stepped forward, but I yanked her back. We can't. Not now. The footsteps were at the door. We ducked behind a row of cages just as it creaked open. Figures in lab coats filed in, dragging chains that rattled against the concrete. Behind them came the chief of police, his eyes cold, his voice carrying through the cavern. Phase 2 begins tonight, he announced. The containment breach upstairs is already covered. The school board will meet in the morning to approve the expansion. By next semester, we'll have triple the subjects. The masked figures murmured their approval. Amy's nails dug into my arm. Her breathing was ragged, on the edge of panic. I leaned close, whispering, "We need to get this on video. Proof. This will expose everything." She nodded shakily, pulling her phone from her pocket. The flashlight stayed off, the screen dim as she hit record. The chief paced between the cages, tapping the bars with a baton. "Some of you will thrive. Some of you will serve as warnings. Either way, you will all be remembered for what you help us achieve." A low growl echoed from the cages. One of the creatures lunged, slamming against the bars. The chief didn't flinch. "Amy, cut it all." Her phone shook in her hands, but the red recording light glowed steady. Then the hum started again. Louder this time. Stronger. It filled the cavern, vibrating through my chest. The creature stirred, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The humming wasn't from the pipes or the machines. It was coming from them. Amy's phone slipped from her hands, clattering against the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. Every masked head turned at once. "Run!" I hissed, grabbing her hand. We bolted for the far side of the cavern, weaving between cages as hands and claws reached through the bars, grasping at our clothes. The humming grew into a chorus, dissonant and terrible, shaking the walls. Behind us, the chief shouted, "Don't let them leave." We crashed through a side door, plunging into another tunnel. The flashlight flickered as we sprinted, our footsteps echoing alongside the pursuit behind us. The tunnel narrowed, the ceiling pressing lower. My chest heaved with every breath. Then, suddenly, the floor vanished. Amy screamed as we skidded to a halt at the edge of a massive pit. A broken staircase spiraled down into darkness, steps crumbling into nothing. "There's no way," she gasped. The footsteps were closing in. I grabbed her wrist. "It's this or them." We started down the staircase, each step threatening to crumble under our weights. The air grew colder still, filled with the stench of rot. Something moved in the shadows below, a wet, slithering sound that made my stomach flip. Amy's flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of shapes on the wall's symbols carved deep into the stone, pulsing faintly with sickly green light. The humming followed us, growing louder, layered with the chief's voice barking orders, the clatter of boots against stone. A step gave way beneath me. I slipped, tumbling forward, my hands scraping raw against the jagged rock. Amy screamed my name, grabbing me just in time to keep me from plummeting into the abyss. My legs dangled over nothing, The darkness below swallowed the beam of the flashlight. For a second I swore I saw movement, something vast. Shifting, waiting. Amy hauled me back, both of us collapsing onto the broken steps. "We can't go down," she whispered, panic choking her voice. But we couldn't go back either. The footsteps were almost on us. And then, from the abyss below, a single voice rose above the humming. Clear. Human. It whispered our names. Amy's grip tightened on my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. We both froze, staring into the void below. The voice rose again, soft but insistent, curling through the darkness like smoke. It shouldn't have been possible, but I knew it. I knew the voice. "Tyler," I whispered. Amy's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. "That's impossible. Tyler's gone." The humming from above swelled, vibrating through the crumbling staircase. Shadows twisted along the walls as the masked figures closed in. The abyss below breathed, exhaling cold air that smelled of rust and decay. And still, through it all, Tyler's voice whispered our names, pleading, begging. Amy shook her head violently. "It's a trick!" "It has to be." But the sound, it wasn't like the humming, fractured and broken. It was familiar. Human. I stood, wobbling on the unstable steps, staring into the void. What if he's alive down there? Amy grabbed my arm. What if he's not? What if that's what they want us to believe? The footsteps were nearly upon us now. The glow of their flashlights lit the tunnel above, shadows stretching long across the staircase. We had seconds. "Choose," Amy hissed. "The pit below, or the monsters above." The voice whispered again, louder, my name, clear as day. I made the choice. We jumped. The air tore past us as we plunged into the darkness. My stomach lurched. My ears roared. My body braced for an impact that never came. Instead, we fell into cold, stagnant water, the stench burning my throat. I surfaced, coughing, gasping, clawing for air. Amy sputtered beside me, her flashlight miraculously still in her hand, casting a weak circle of light across the cavern. We were in an underground reservoir. Black water stretched in every direction, lapping against stone walls covered in those same pulsing symbols. And then movement. A figure emerged from the water ahead. Pale, thin, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Tyler," I whispered. He looked like him. Almost. But his smile was too wide, his movements too stiff, as though his skin didn't quite fit anymore. "Come," he rasped, voice cracking. "Come deeper. Safe here." Amy grabbed my wrist, trembling. "That's not him. That's not him." The humming above grew distant, muffled by stone and water. But down here, another sound rose to replace it, hundreds of whispers, layered together, all calling our names. Shapes stirred beneath the water. Pale hands brushed against my legs. I kicked, panicked, but the whispers only grew louder, filling my head, drowning my thoughts. Amy screamed. yanking me toward a ledge at the far side of the reservoir. We clawed our way out of the water, collapsing onto the stone floor. Tyler roared. The thing wearing him watched us from the black surface, head tilted at an unnatural angle. "You can't leave," he whispered. "You're already chosen." The whispers echoed his words. Amy and I staggered to our feet, soaked, shivering, hearts pounding. There was only one tunnel leading out of the chamber, carved into the stone like a wound. The symbols along the walls glowed brighter as we stumbled toward it, their light pulsing in time with our racing hearts. Behind us, the water churned. Dozens of pale faces broke the surface, mouths open in silent screams, their eyes fixed on us. We ran, the tongue twisted endlessly, the whispers following, the glow of the symbols lighting our way. My lungs burned. My legs threatened to give out. But we didn't stop, not until a faint rectangle of light appeared ahead. An exit! We crashed through the opening, spilling onto damped grass under the night sky. Stars glimmered overhead, mocking us with their normalcy. The school loomed in the distance, its windows dark, silent, hiding everything we'd seen beneath it. Amy fell to her knees, sobbing. I collapsed beside her, staring back at the whole weed crawled out of half-expecting pale hands to claw their way into the open air. But nothing came. Only silence. We were free. For now. Amy turned to me, her voice broken. "No one will believe us." I stared at the school, the town beyond it, the quiet streets where everyone slept, oblivious, and I realized she was right. No one would believe us, not until it was too late.